clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like.
Absolutely.
On Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Just read the headlines.
Good morning and welcome to Sunday with Michael Portillo, with 2 hours of good conversation, arts and entertainment, ethical dilemmas and a sense of the ridiculous too. It's been an important week in British politics. The Scottish Nationalist divisive leadership contest drew to its close, and the Windsor Agreement between the British government and the European Union over Northern Ireland was approved by the House of Commons. Is the United Kingdom now more likely to endure? The boat race between Oxford and Cambridge takes place in a few hours' time. I'll be joined by 2 men who rowed for Cambridge and won Olympic gold medals, as we risk breaching impartiality guidelines by rooting for Cambridge. The writer and critic Philip Hensher will be here to talk about his new book and to celebrate the works of Noel Coward. And another author will tell me about a poisonous group of women who committed 160 murders. But this programme will conclude sweetly with British Honey, the be-all and end-all. All of that to come after the news with Bethany Elsey.
Michael, thank you. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 11. Here are your top stories from the GB newsroom. Offenders who commit antisocial behaviour will be forced to clean up their communities as part of the Prime Minister's new immediate justice scheme. Under the plans set to be announced tomorrow, local authorities will be given fresh powers to quickly and visibly punish criminals. Those who spray graffiti or commit other vandalism will have to make good the damage within 48 hours of being given the order. Other penalties include picking up litter, washing police cars or doing unpaid work in shops. Labour is establishing a review of the BBC's operations to look at the future of the broadcaster. It follows the controversy over Gary Lineker's suspension from Match of the Day and Richard Sharp helping Boris Johnson to secure a loan. The party says the independent BBC review panel will assess how best to ensure the future sustainability of the publicly funded broadcaster. Shadow Culture Secretary Lucy Powell says the organisation consistently finds itself at the centre of culture wars, and that continuing the status quo is not an option. Scottish Labour is warning the incoming SNP leader to clear out the rot within their party. Deputy Leader Jackie Baillie is calling on the future First Minister to be more open and transparent. It's after figures revealed the SNP had lost 30,000 members in just over a year, which had previously denied. Leadership candidates Humza Yousaf, Kate Forbes and Ash Regan will find out tomorrow who will become Scotland's next leader. Russia's President Vladimir Putin says he's struck a deal to store tactical nuclear weapons in neighbouring Belarus, which borders Ukraine. Speaking on state TV last night, he insisted it wasn't unusual, comparing it with the United States stationing nuclear weapons on the territory of European allies. But a top security advisor to Ukraine's president says the plans would destabilise Belarus, claiming Russia has effectively taken the country hostage. At least 26 people have been killed and dozens more injured after a major tornado hit the U.S. state of Mississippi. The twister swept through the state and into Alabama, cutting a path of destruction 170 miles long. Around 11,000 residents are still without power this morning. Drone footage shows an entire town in Mississippi flattened. President Joe Biden has described the images as heartbreaking and has offered federal support for the recovery. Residents say there was no safe place to hide.
This is the worst I have ever. This is devastating. I have so many family members, friends, memories that has been destroyed.
It's like a freight train that comes through. They thought it lasted 30 minutes. It was 20 seconds. One of the homeowners, said they finally woke up and they looked up and they thought they were dead.
In the face of potential arrest, Donald Trump held a defiant rally in Waco, Texas yesterday to kick off his 2024 Republican nomination campaign. It was the former president's first public appearance since speculating last week that he could soon be arrested over hush money payments to the adult film star Stormy Daniels. He lashed out against the investigation, claiming he's the most innocent man in U.S. history.
Prosecutorial misconduct is their new tool, and they are willing to use it at levels never seen before. The stakes of this election could not be more clear. Either we surrender to the demonic forces abolishing and demolishing and happily doing so, or we defeat them in a landslide on November 5th, 2024.
Matt Hancock and Kwasi Kwarteng have been caught up in a sting operation, quoting thousands of pounds to consult for a non-existent company. The two former cabinet ministers were approached by a fake South Korean firm set up by Campaign Group led by donkeys. Mr. Hancock told them his daily rate would be £10,000, whilst Mr. Kwarteng said he would expect to be paid a similar amount every month. MPs are allowed to seek employment outside of Parliament, and there is no current accusation of any wrongdoing. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Michael.
Thank you, Bethany Elsie. An arduous, some might say calamitous contest within the Scottish National Party will produce a new leader to be announced in Edinburgh around 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Since Nicola Sturgeon's resignation, the party has been engulfed by turmoil. Ms Sturgeon's husband, Peter Murrell, resigned as the SNP chief executive after the party covered up a massive decline in membership. The party faces a police investigation over funds unaccounted for. The three leadership candidates trashed each other, and two of them attacked the record of the party in government. Scottish Unionists felt relieved, since the prospect of independence seems to have receded as the nationalists have descended into factionalism. Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionists voted against the Windsor Framework in the House of Commons, but with overwhelming support from the Conservative and Labour parties on Wednesday, it passed easily. The DUP argues that the agreement locks Northern Ireland into the EU's orbit, undermining the province's place within the United Kingdom. But have recent events made our union of nations more secure? To discuss that, I'm joined by the former First Minister of Northern Ireland, now GB News presenter Arlene Foster, Alan Cochrane, the Scotland editor of the Daily Telegraph, and here in the studio, the deputy editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill. Arlene, it's lovely to see you. Welcome to GB News. We know that the DUP voted against the Windsor Agreement, but I think attention now turns to the future. Clearly, you're not happy with it, but might the DUP re-enter power sharing in Northern Ireland?
Well, it's lovely to be with you, Michael, and my goodness, you're looking absolutely fabulous today. I even brought out my red glasses to try and compete, but I don't think I will be able to compete today. Yes, I'm not surprised the DUP voted against the Windsor Framework because there are still some outstanding issues, not least the issue around Article 6 of the Act of Union, because you will recall that the Supreme Court has said that the protocol has suspended part of the Acts of Union in its operation. That's to do with trade, internal trade in the United Kingdom internal market. So that hasn't been dealt with, and I think whilst the DUP, of course, is a devolutionist party and will want to see devolution back, and we all know it's 25 years since the Belfast Agreement, now coming up very soon on the 10th of April, they want to be back in devolution. However, they do need to have some issues, not just clarified, but dealt with probably through legislation in Westminster, and the Prime Minister can do that. The question is whether he is willing to do that. And just to reflect on your introduction, I think this is an absolutely good time for unionism in Scotland. There are opportunities, but those opportunities have to be taken. And likewise, in Northern Ireland, we have to look to wider unionism, right across the United Kingdom, and not just focus in on ourselves. I think it's important that we look at the whole of the Union and not just Northern Ireland. And as you know, I've set up a foundation to do just that, and I intend to continue the work to advocate for the Union in the widest possible sense.
Arlene, thank you for your very kind words. And may I say how happy I am when you take this seat and take over this programme from time to time. But you said something which I'd just like to elucidate there. You're talking about some legislation that could be reassuring to Northern Ireland, but you can't be meaning anything which would unpick the new Windsor framework, I take it. In what area, then, are you talking about?
Well, internally, in terms of the United Kingdom, because the point in the Supreme Court was that the protocol under the Withdrawal Act, which went through Parliament, did suspend that part of the Act of Union because of parliamentary sovereignty. Parliament is supreme. So if Parliament decided to pass a later law saying that actually that suspension has now been lifted, the internal workings of the UK trade is very much sovereign, then I think that could deal with that Article 6 of the Union point and deal with the Supreme Court judgment. But that's in the hands of the Prime Minister. It doesn't need to involve the European Union.
Very interesting. And I note also you say how keen politicians in Northern Ireland are to return to devolution, to the devolved institutions, which have not been functioning now for some time. Let me turn to Alan Cochrane and the subject of Scotland. Alan, for a long time, you've written pretty trenchantly about Nicola Sturgeon. What are your reflections on the state of the SNP and the state of Scotland as her period in office comes to an end?
I think the state of Scotland is confused and a bit sad because it hasn't advanced as it should have if we'd believed all the stories about devolution. And the Sturgeon demise, while surprising in that it happened in the space, I remember the 3 years building up, the 3 decades building up to when me watching Nicola, as a hugely important figure in Scottish politics. But her demise has been over in 3 months. And it's very, very strange, the reasons behind it. I don't think we've finally got to the bottom of those reasons, but I do think Scotland's a better place for her going. And with devolution fast disappearing off the political agenda, at least as far as ordinary people in Scotland are concerned.
It's funny, Alan, the situation slightly reminds me of Harold Wilson's resignation. It's quite a long time ago, 1976, I think. But we were all left wondering what it was really about. And we are left wondering, aren't we? What was Nicola Sturgeon's resignation all about? Is it something to do with the police investigation? Is it something to do with the numbers of members which have not been properly declared? Or was it that she got into such a mess over the gender legislation? Or simply, and I refer here to your views and your articles, that Scotland has done so poorly on many measures?
Well, there were three big issues that did for her recently. There was the Supreme Court farce, where she tried to get the Supreme Court to say, yes, of course Scotland can have its own referendum without the permission of the UK government. That was nonsense. It was a breach of the Scotland Act if she'd done that. There was the disaster of the ferry programme, where two big ferries were still urgently needed by the people of the Outer Hebrides. Well, in fact, I think it's the Inner Hebrides with these two ferries. But they're 5 years overdue. The costs going up from 97 million to 300 million. And she nationalised, by the way, that shipyard. That's another big minus. And then recently we have this question mark over a sum of £600,000, which was donated by SNP members supposedly to pay for another independence referendum campaign. As everyone knows, that campaign hasn't materialised, but neither has the money. It's gone. So where has it gone? The police have been investigating this, I think, since Adam was a boy. They gave the papers to the Crown Office, the Scottish Prosecution Service, in January, and nothing has happened, and deadly silence has fallen over the whole thing, other than in the pubs and bars and tea rooms of Scotland, everybody's talking about it. Where's the money?
At this point, I'm going to say thank you to Arlene Foster. Thank you for coming on Sunday morning. I know you love to go to church. Alan Cochrane, too. Thank you to both. I'm going to turn now to Henry Hill, who's in the studio with me. What is your reflection on the state of the Union? Do you think the Union is more secure after the events of this last week?
It is more secure. It's not perfectly secure, but it is secure. The SNP, the unravelling of the SNP to an extent is a hugely beneficial event. You know, for a long time, the SNP has this phalanx-like discipline, this extraordinary internal culture, and whatever you think about them on individual issues, it's been led by two outstanding leaders in a row, Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon. And it was always going to be incredible if lightning could strike thrice, which doesn't look like it will. But the sort of reversion, if you like, there's always been a portrait of Dorian Gray somewhere in the SNP's attic, and someone's finally made them look at it, and all of these issues are coming back to haunt them. That's good news. The Windsor framework is an improvement. I think it's important that we acknowledge on the mainland that the DUP's criticisms of it are legitimate. Basically, Theresa May's government did, by being unprepared, accept an interpretation of the Belfast Agreement from Dublin and Brussels, which effectively inverted its main provision. The idea was always Northern Ireland would be secure in the Union until such time as a referendum changed that. And it turned out that actually what many people seem to think that meant would be that Northern Ireland is part of Ireland's economic orbit already. So it's not perfect, but it is stronger.
Yes. I was very interested in what Arlene Foster was saying there a moment ago, because she was clearly opening up the opportunity for the government to compromise. She expressed very clearly the wish of the DUP and other parties to go back into devolved government. I thought it was quite hopeful. And indeed, although the DUP voted against the legislation last week, they didn't kind of make a song and dance about it, did they? No, the DUP do want to leave a pathway open, because they are a devolutionary party, fundamentally. Way more of them, not least, are employed by the Northern Ireland Assembly than are employed in Westminster. The problem for that approach regarding the mainland is that ultimately we now have an Office for the Internal Market, which was set up to protect the integrity of the UK internal market. Now, regarding the Windsor Framework, one of the problems with it is that the EU's designation of all these things as green lane goods is not baked into EU law anywhere. It's basically an act of goodwill. And therefore, if the UK, or the mainland, sorry, Great Britain, were to diverge on various things, the EU could, at the drop of a hat, simply say that these things were no longer green lane goods. So there is now a danger that basically, if a future British government tries to deliver a Brexit dividend in a given area, that office can say, actually, this is going to lead to divergence from Northern Ireland, and therefore it could end up being what some people always feared Northern Ireland's
situation would be a way of locking the UK in. So it's actually very difficult for the government to deliver that kind of guarantee.
Yes. I mean, what I find interesting about the new Northern Ireland Agreement is precisely what you've been referring to, that it seems to me very much to limit Brexit for the United Kingdom. It has reintroduced the United Kingdom issue. It's almost as though we had decided, which was one of the early plans, that we would not leave the single market. And in a way, this is helpful in the Northern Ireland context, because actually the implications of this for the United Kingdom, it seems to me, are as broad and deep and as important as they are for Northern Ireland.
Absolutely. I think basically we are paying the price for, not least the British government, for failing to have Northern Ireland on our radar. The British government was completely blindsided by these issues in 2016. They had neglected this issue. They didn't have their own interpretation of the Belfast Agreement to go out and tell the world about. And so now we are stuck in this situation. It was always going to be the case that if you simultaneously wanted to protect the internal market within the United Kingdom between Great Britain and Northern Ireland and make it absolute prerogative of maintaining completely unfettered commercial trade between Northern Ireland and the Republic, that you would end up with alignment. That has always been the case. So the question was always, which one are you going to break if you want to break them? And I think successive governments have ducked that question.
Henry Hill, I think that's a really very deep and very interesting analysis. Thank you very much indeed. Well, GB News will, of course, be covering the result of the SNP leadership contest tomorrow around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. After the break, it's the annual boat race between this country's two oldest universities, one of the most gruelling contests in sport. I'll be joined by two Olympian oarsmen.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my common sense crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Rowing at the Olympics may involve a 1,000-metre sprint on the calm waters of a man-made lake, with boats separated into specific lanes. But every year, 2 boats of elite rowers race for 4 miles along the tidal waters of the River Thames, battling not just each other, but also the wind and the rain, and often tussling for position like jockeys in a horse race as they navigate the twists and turns of the course. The boat races between Oxford and Cambridge will begin at 4 o'clock today, first with the women's, followed by the men's event. I'm delighted to be joined by Olympic gold medalists and boat race oarsman Tom Ransley here in the studio and James Cracknell to discuss what makes it unique and gruelling. Coming first to you, James, you did things in a curious order because you were an Olympian first and then you rowed in a boat race. Tell us about how that came about, that sequence of events.
Yeah, so my first undergraduate degree I did at Reading, and then went into the national team. And actually, it was following a bicycle accident, and I suffered a brain injury on that, which I think it definitely left me doubting myself, and to be honest, other people doubting whether I would or wouldn't be able to be the same person I was before. And it coincided with doing quite a lot of work in public health, and I thought if I could further the public health credentials and also show to myself and other people that everything was the same, if not better, after brain injury, then that'd be a good thing to do. And then whilst there, I thought, actually, even though I've been out of the boat for 15 years, if I could make the boat race crew, that would be a special event to do.
Am I right in thinking you went to Peterhouse, Cambridge? I ask because I'm wearing a Peterhouse tie and I've got a Peterhouse badge on my blazer here.
I was at Peterhouse, yes, and I was aware you went there. Your name is up there. It's a very special place, and if anyone hasn't studied at Cambridge, that you got to get into the university and then get accepted by a college as well, and the support of you actually see more people of your college, and because the university spread all around town, so it's a special place.
Now, without being ungallant, James, you were quite old when you competed in the boat. Indeed, I think you were 10 years older than anybody else has ever been. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it was a different challenge in especially cultural references, in that I was older than everyone else's dad who I was rowing with. So some of the cultural things weren't quite marrying up, but it was actually a really useful experience for me in terms of seeing how the younger guys, actually they set quite a lot of limits on themselves, and having the experience, look, actually you are capable of a lot more than that. And then also from them, just gaining the enthusiasm that you lose after having been around for 4 decades. I was enthused by them, and then I think they learnt some racing knowledge off me.
I bet they did. James Cracknell, thank you very much. I'm going to turn to Tom Ransley, who's here in the studio with me. How gruelling is this event compared with others?
Yeah, it's a super tough event. 4.25 miles certainly doesn't fly by. And yeah, it's a 6-month campaign, so that's long in one sense. Like, it's a big project, so there's lots of miles to get through to build up that fitness. But also in another sense, you're kind of condensing a full year into just 6 months. So you're really trying to put a lot of intensity in there, so you peak a lot earlier than a lot of the other clubs would who aren't doing a boat race.
Yes. And I'm so sorry, you were in the losing boat twice. I mean, that really is unlucky. And I mean, can you describe your feelings after all that work and you don't win?
Yeah, it's a tough one to take. And I actually think it's quite a good event to sort of cut your teeth if you've got aspirations to race internationally, because you really learn to cope with pressure. And yeah, at that stage, that was the biggest loss I'd done in my career. But I think it sort of adds fuel to the fire to try and step on afterwards.
And the opposite way round to James, you went on from being an oarsman in a Cambridge boat to being an Olympian in 2016, and you won gold.
Yeah, that's right. And I definitely think I got a lot to be thankful for Cambridge University Boat Club. I think I had some raw ingredients when I got there, but they had a very professional approach to training, world-class coaches, and I certainly sharpened up my technique. I think that was a good platform to sort of spring into the team.
And apart from being a great athlete, what does it do to you as a person? I imagine it must have a transformatory effect on you to be in a team like that, to compete at that level, to expect so much of yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I think Cracknell actually was, hit the nail on the head actually in terms of the enthusiasm amongst the squad and being amongst, a really driven group of individuals. And they're pushing, academic workload as well, and that's, it's really rigorous. So, you have to be, hot on your time management skills,
Yes.
and you have to get things done when it needs to get done. So, it was really enjoyable, and it's certainly, some sort of friends for life there.
I'm not sure that we are favourites today, but let's hope for a very good race. And you and I can say, I'm not sure I'm allowed to say under rules, that you and I can quietly hope for a Cambridge victory. Let's see what happens. Thank you very much, Tom Ransley.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
A biography of Noel Coward by Oliver Soden has received fulsome praise in The Spectator. Masquerade, The Lives of Noel Coward, explores the many faces of the tireless playwright, composer and actor who, whether in his personal or professional life, never stopped performing. It's the fourth biography of Coward, though the first that explores his personal relationships. Coward's witty and irreverent scripts and songs delighted English audiences for half a century, and a younger generation saw his final performance as an old-fashioned but all-powerful mob boss who coordinates a gold heist from his prison cell in the 1969 movie The Italian Job. Author and critic Philip Hensher joins me in the studio now. So you were writing in The Spectator. You gave a very good review to the new biography of Noel Coward. Is Noel Coward a figure of great interest to you?
I think he's a figure of enormous interest, actually. He's of that generation of writers that were really liberated by the spread of universal education, of opening up of possibilities. And he came from a very ordinary background, South London boy. He had nothing much to recommend him. He was an outsider in that he was gay. He was, he lived his entire life in a state of illegality. And yet he kind of got to the heart of the affections and love of the British people, and he created literature that's going to last forever, I think. And I think that it goes on being interesting, which is odd, because at the time, these plays that are now classics, Hay Fever and Private Lives, the critics said, this is a marvellous play, but it won't last. Nobody will put it on in 5 years' time. And they've just gone on and on and on.
The thing about the background is fascinating to me because of all the establishment figures, of all the people that you would think were upper crust, I mean, he mixed with royalty and with aristocracy. He always had a cigarette holder in his hand and a cocktail in the other. Just extraordinary that he was able to pull it off. But one of the points made by the biography and by your review is that he was always performing. He was always in a role.
I think it's almost impossible. I mean, Oliver Soden's done a fantastic job, but I think it's almost impossible to get beyond that carapace of performance. He was always just kind of putting it on, turning himself into an aristocrat. I mean, the performance in which we serve, marvellous movie, where he's basically doing a Dickie Mountbatten impersonation is just marvellous. What was there behind that mask? I don't know. Maybe there wasn't anything. Maybe it was all mask, and that's interesting, I think.
You talked about living in illegality, a reference to being gay, but unlike many other stars, he didn't come a cropper with the law.
No, it's absolutely baffling, really. I don't know how he got away with it. I think his whole life is a testament to the power of cheek and getting away with it. The only time he came in for any kind of brush with the law was his tax affairs. But for the rest of it, I mean, everybody knew. That was the thing. I suspect that on some level, the authorities thought, well, he's just too popular. I mean, are we really going to break a butterfly upon a wheel? They did it to, they certainly, they prosecuted John Gielgud, for instance.
I remember this.
But I suspect that they just thought it wasn't worth it to go after Coward.
An interesting point that you made in your review was the contribution that you think he made to theatre. And here, rather surprisingly, you talked about him as being a predecessor to I've suddenly lost the names, to Pinter, for example.
And Beckett.
And
yes.
to Beckett.
It is interesting, actually. That generation that came after Coward, the 1950s generation, they were all hailed at the time as being, great. Now we're getting back to basics. Arnold Wesker, we're getting back to look back in anger. But those have rather disappeared. The ones that have survived, I mean, if you look at Pinter or the banter in Waiting for Godot, it's got a very kind of Noel Coward rhythm. It's kind of do. And I think that that kind of I hesitate to use the word banter because it's been so co-opted, but it is really what it's like, that back and forth that you get in private lives, but also in The Caretaker or Waiting for Godot. I think it's absolutely at the core of what English comedy has always done.
We probably ought to say something about his musicality.
Oh yes, I mean that's the thing that I think keeps the plays going. I mean, if you shut your eyes, you can just hear the music in Hay Fever, just the rhythm of it. But also the songs, I think, are the best of them. They're absolutely deathless. They will carry on forever. Mad Dogs and Englishmen is proverbial. I think that and that musicality allowed him to get away with all sorts of stuff. I mean, writing "Don't Let's Be Beastly to the Germans" in the middle of the Second World War, and Churchill adored that song. You could say all sorts of things. You can get away with all sorts of things if the tune is good enough, as it were.
Philip, thank you very much indeed. For now, we're going to be speaking later. We're going to be speaking later about your new book, and we're going to take up some other subjects with you as well. But before that, we'll be discussing the popularity of the true crime genre with the author of The Angel Makers, a group of women poisoners who committed scores of murders in one Hungarian village. Stay with us.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know
All
Kate
sorts of
Moss?
women. Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back. In 1929, a sleepy village in Hungary attracted global press coverage as a large group of women went on trial for murdering more than 160 people. Led by a ruthless midwife known as Auntie Susie, the women had dosed scores of unwanted, mostly male relatives with arsenic over the course of 15 years. This non-fiction crime saga has been recreated in absorbing detail by US author Patty McCracken in her new book, The Angel Makers, the true story of the most astonishing murder ring in history. I'm very pleased to be joined by Patty, live from Massachusetts. Patty, this is the most extraordinary story. It's quite hard to put numbers on this because, of course, not all the cases were solved. But do you have a feeling about how many perpetrators there were and how many victims?
Well, the number of perpetrators that were rounded up, there were 66 women who were indicted. But there's believed to be even more than 162 men. So the 66 women were indicted for the deaths of 42 men, but the prosecutor fully believed that he could absolutely dig 162 bodies up and come up with arsenic with every one. And he even thought there were hundreds more. But they had to put a stop to how many they were digging up because they just didn't have the money, and many of the perpetrators at that time had already passed on themselves. But it was an enormous, enormous number.
Patty, do you have any explanation of how this could be? I find it quite hard to put myself in the shoes of a murderer, but in a village, for there to be scores of murderers, tens of murderers at least, this is remarkable. How did this idea, as it were, this notion that you could kill unuseful males, how did it spread from woman to woman?
Well, it didn't start in this village, and it had been going on for many decades and eons. It was a way to get rid of an abusive spouse. And this is largely what these women did. And the central figure in this village was the midwife. And the midwife was the obvious choice for them. She was their go-to she was the de facto doctor. She was the de facto vet. She was also the expert herbalist, and she knew everything about plant medicine. And so she would distribute it to them. And for her, it was a business. There were others in the village that were doing this, but it was a sister helping a sister, a mother helping another mother. But for Auntie Susie, the midwife, it was a business. She would go around and she would distill arsenic from the flypaper, and she would go around and she would listen to their problems and say, why are you bothering with him? I have a solution. And she literally had a solution that she would pull out of her apron pocket and make arrangements with them.
So some of the motives were about getting rid of unwanted children or husbands who become a nuisance. And for Auntie Susie, some of the motives were also venal, weren't they? Because she was getting money and she was acquiring the property of other people.
Yes, for her it was a business. And it's important to say that most of the women were doing this because their husbands were unwanted because they were being abused by their husbands and they didn't have any help. And so this was their only way out. But definitely for Auntie Susie, it was a business. She had a strategy of a payment strategy, and she had a different plan for how much it would cost if they actually distributed the arsenic themselves or if she distributed the arsenic. It was a business plan for her. It was her way of making money, and I think she did quite well for making money, not quite well. Yeah.
Patty, I think it may be your first book, but there is what is now known as a true crime genre. You fit into a pattern. Do you have a comment about the public's interest in this kind of story?
Yeah, when I set out to write this book, I wasn't thinking true crime or anything. I'm a journalist, and it was a compelling story. But I think it's both mystifying and compelling, this true crime. Why does it happen? Why does it happen? We start as children. The first question we ask is why? And so I think it satisfies that need to know why. And it looks at our darker side. You know, we all have our shadow sides, and we think, could this happen here? Could I be compelled to do this? And I think, oh gosh, I hope not. But that's why we do that. We sort of safely from a distance, we can read this and test what would our own boundaries be in this kind of situation.
Well, I read the book with great pleasure, but I don't think it was because I was asking myself whether I was likely to become an arsenic poisoner. But Patty, it's a very good read, and congratulations on it. The Angel Makers, the true story of the most astonishing murder ring in history. Thanks for joining us from Massachusetts.
Thank you so much.
Last week, we discussed the remarkable career of Andrew Lloyd Webber, a giant of the musical theatre business. And now has come the very sad news of the death of his son, Nicholas, after an illness. My sincerest condolences to Andrew. During the week, Andrew Lloyd Webber butted heads with another pillar of the theatre world, playwright David Hare. Hare wrote in The Spectator that he was dismayed to walk past Wyndham's Theatre in London's West End and see a production of Oklahoma squatting there. Musicals, he said, have become the Leylandi of the theatre, strangling everything in their path. Well, Andrew Lloyd Webber didn't hold back when he suggested that Hare was simply trying to bury his own contribution to musical theatre. He labelled Hare's 1987 musical, The Knife, one of the greatest musical disasters in history. Meow. Sounds like a cat's fight. Well, the arts editor of Express Online, Stefan Kyriazis, is here once again. So the gloves came off between these two.
Sure.
But let us test the proposition. Funnily enough, I had been thinking about this because I told you I had been in New York. And in New York, I went to see a couple of musicals, but I also wanted to go and see a straight play, a play that was dialogue. And I found it extremely difficult. Eventually, I hit upon one. There was an Ibsen play, A Doll's House, and very excellent it was. But it was a struggle to find something that wasn't a musical. Now, it struck me that this is absolutely not true of London. You and I have been talking over the last few weeks about so many splendid straight plays. So, in that sense, I find Hare's proposition unproven, but he was obviously upset that Wyndham's, which doesn't normally have musicals, they've got over to musicals, and the other thing he referred to was, the theatre in Sloane Square. Yeah, the theatre in Sloane Square has at the moment not got any plays on, I think. So he was saying there's a dearth of new material coming forward.
Well, he's wrong, which we know. There's a load of new material. There's been, the past 12 months, there's been some extraordinary new straight theatre, sort of without exception. There's lots more coming up. So he's definitely wrong. And he's generated a whole argument now within the industry, within the press. The Guardian has lashed out on 3 points, saying not only are they musical strangling straight theatre, but also we're not attracting great stars to the stage anymore, great plays are not being written anymore, and the classics are not being performed anymore, which all, to me, seem unproven and unfounded. So
we're talking about David Hare, and then you say there's a sort of campaign going on in The Guardian. So the politics here, are there? Is this another culture war?
Potentially. I think it's possibly, again, I know from friends that are in the industry that are actors as well, there's always a slight perception that musical theatre is the slightly silly sibling of proper theatre. So I think that possibly seeps through to playwrights and sometimes writers and critics as well. So I think that's what's going on.
You see, it's odd that they make the point about, whether they're making the point about new theatre or about classics. I mean, in the last few weeks, I've seen Titus Andronicus and I've seen Henry V. I've seen Phaedra. Phaedra is a new piece of work, but it picks up on a classical theme.
Medea, yeah.
Absolutely. Then, you know, modern classics, as it were, A Streetcar Named Desire, which I saw yesterday, To Kill a Mockingbird, which I saw a few weeks ago. I just do find the David Hare point quite difficult to run with.
Yeah, I don't know where it's come from. I think partly it's the Wyndham he regards as the perfect place for the spoken word. So I think it's just triggered something in him. He has a particular love for this theatre. There's obviously something bubbling away, and this has triggered it. But yeah, there's tremendous amount of existing classics, but also very exciting things. The next 2 months, I went through the list, and there's 5, 6 different things, wildly different plays. From Lenny Henry's got his first one-man show that he's written, but we've also got A Little Life coming up. We've got The Motive in the Queue coming up. We've got so many exciting new theatre productions, and we have Soho Place. We have a new theatre created by Nika Burns in the centre of London as well. It's an exciting time.
Remind us about The Motive in the Queue, because that does look like an exciting place.
Yeah, and that is theatre about theatre about theatre. It couldn't be any more wonderful, with big names performing as well. What more could you want? It's about the Gielgud, Burton and Taylor era in New York, and they're creating a play, which is very, very exciting. And I would also just say Mark Rylance is back in a brand new play coming up, Dr. Semmelweis. So these are exciting things.
Yes. So at last night, I got to see A Streetcar Named Desire.
Good.
Again, we're talking about big names on the London stage. And also sold out, I think, a 6-week run in 2 hours for a straight play. So there doesn't seem to be a lack of audience. And also, I just think there are different audiences, aren't there? Absolutely. I imagine the musicals are attracting a lot of foreign tourists, a lot of tourists to London, even if they're not foreign, even if they're coming from other parts of Britain. These other straight plays that we've been talking to are also attracting people probably from around Britain. But obviously, you need at least to be competent in English to go to a straight play.
Sure. And musicals are generating the people coming into the West End. They're also generating a lot of business for restaurants and other things. But you can't deny they bring the people in. And once those people are there, they may well see other things as well. But you have buzz, you have engagement, you have crowds. This is hugely important. And that is what the musicals, on the whole, are doing and have always done. And we need them to keep doing that, undeniably.
Also, there's another area to think about, which is, as it were, the fusion of the two. You put me on to a play called Standing at Sky's Edge, at the Sky's Edge. This is a play on at the National Theatre. It's about 3 generations of people who occupy a flat in that development which overlooks Sheffield from on the high. And on the whole, I would describe it as a straight play. Every now and again, the cast burst into song.
Yeah. I would say, because I have a few friends that are musicals lovers and had a few issues with it, for me, it's a play with music. Absolutely stunning. I love that. Fuse it. And it worked better in the second half, integrating the music in the play. But we've also got something coming up, again, Soho Place. They have a new piece coming in based on Brokeback Mountain, which is, again, being billed as a play with music. So they will be working together. It's not a straight musical. I love this. Something different. And you can bring the joy and the emotion of the music. You can still have a strong book and text based on a play. Great. Let's have more of that.
Have you been to see Oklahoma?
I have.
Someone described it. Was it David Hare or was it someone else described it as Woklahoma?
Woklahoma.
What were they referring to? What's happened to this production?
It's a radical revision of the play. I mean, of the musical. It's very much regarded as a joyous, uplifting piece about the creation of the state of Oklahoma. There's a bit of nasty business at the end, and someone gets killed. But on the whole, it's uplifting. You have songs like Oh, What a Beautiful Morning, and then the title song. They're rousing, euphoric numbers. This does the absolute reverse with it. So it is about hard times on the frontier west, and it's about the sort of the worst parts of human nature. So it actually looks at the guy that's the outsider, and you have a bit more sympathy with him. It's very, very interesting. For me, it was a subversion too far, possibly, but I know that people are loving it, raving it. It's absolutely dividing people, and that's exciting. That's great. Hurrah for those that loved it. I did not, but I can appreciate what it's doing. And it's selling out like crazy, and it's bringing in a completely different younger audience as well. So great.
I couldn't agree with you more about the role of the theatre in dividing people. To be part of the controversy is very, very exciting. I went to see the Lehman trilogy this week.
Yes.
And I didn't like it all.
It's too long.
I found it very long, and also I began to wonder why we were paying so much attention to these particular people.
Yeah.
OK, a lovely story about success in a business family followed by failure many generations later. But I wasn't quite sure why we were giving so much attention to them.
Because the final 10 or 20 minutes are fundamentally fascinating and devastating about the collapse of the financial system, which is also about our modern world and speculation and all the things we don't understand about money that isn't really there. But that across a 3-hour or something play, we got to that in the last 20 minutes. So I thought we had a very lovely but not particularly necessary story of a successful family. And then when it got to the meat at the end, it rushed through it and said, oh, and this happened. And it didn't help me understand, and I don't understand that. And theatre should be helping us to understand a human situation.
I'm glad to hear you say that. That was entirely my view.
Yeah.
I went to see it, obviously, in the week after the Silicon Valley Bank had collapsed, when Credit Suisse said it had to be rescued. I wonder whether it would have a new relevance to me. But as you say, they rather gobbled their way through the important bit at the end. So there we are, the role of theatre. Thank you very much to Stefan Kyriazis. Coming up in the next hour, we'll be joined by some women trailblazers as we mark the 50th anniversary of women being allowed onto the floor of the London Stock Exchange. I'll also be asking why men aren't reading fiction. And I'll be waxing lyrical about bees in this week's Taste of Britain. That's all after the weather.
Good afternoon, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office. So looking ahead to the start of next week, and after a cold night, we'll see some drier and more settled weather becoming established across the UK. And this is all due to a change in our bigger weather picture. So this morning's low pressure across the southeast will move away, and this will allow some northerly winds to set up, bringing some colder air across the whole of the UK to start Monday. But back to this evening, and we'll see some showers persisting across northern and eastern coasts, and these could just be wintry for a time. But skies will clear, allowing for a widespread harsh frost across Northern Ireland, Scotland and Northern England tonight, where we could see temperatures dropping as low as -6 to -8. Now further south, there'll be some patchy cloud around, but there could still be a patchy frost to start Monday and maybe just the odd shower too. But away from this, skies will clear to start the new week, allowing for plenty of sunshine and fine and dry weather. It'll be feeling pleasant in that sunshine, but temperatures will not be much higher tomorrow than what we'll have seen today, with highs of around 11 degrees. As we go into Monday afternoon and evening, we do cling on to those bright, clearer skies across the north and the east as we go through to Monday night. But further west, we see cloud and rain moving in from the Atlantic as that next low pressure system moves in. So a cloudier, milder night here. But across the northern and eastern areas, we could just see a patchy frost still to start Tuesday morning. But it will be a short-lived frost as that cloud and rain will quickly move in from the west through Tuesday morning. We could just see a little bit of snow over the high ground of Scotland and northern England on the leading edge of that. And that sets up the weather for much of next week. We'll be remaining unsettled with some showers or rain, but temperatures will be on the up, particularly from midweek.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon and welcome to the second hour of Sunday with Michael Portillo with even more good conversation, arts, debate and as always a sense of the ridiculous. Coming up I'll meet some of the trailblazing women who were the first to work on the floor of the London Stock Exchange when it ceased to be men only 50 years ago. We'll be exploring the horizons of travel with Project Sunrise, which is expanding non-stop flights from Australia to Europe and the United States. And are men being left behind by the publishing industry? The fiction market is now overwhelmingly female. Why aren't men reading novels as they used to? Plus, I brave a swarm of stinging insects. No, I'm not going back into the Conservative Party, but sampling English honey in Essex. All of that to come after the news with Bethany Elsey.
Michael, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 12. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. Offenders who commit antisocial behaviour will be forced to clean up their communities as part of the Prime Minister's new immediate justice scheme. Under the plans set to be announced tomorrow, local authorities will be given fresh powers to quickly and visibly punish criminals. Those who spray graffiti or commit other vandalism will have to make good the damage within 48 hours of being given the order. Other penalties include picking up litter, washing police cars or doing unpaid work in shops. Well, as part of the crackdown, the government has also announced a ban on the sale of laughing gas. Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove told broadcasters nitrous oxide canisters are helping fuel antisocial behaviour, turning public spaces into so-called drug-taking arenas. In other news, Labour is establishing a review of the BBC's operations to look at the future of the broadcaster. It follows the controversy over Gary Lineker's suspension from Match of the Day and Richard Sharp helping Boris Johnson to secure a loan. The party says the independent BBC review panel will assess how best to ensure the future sustainability of the publicly funded broadcaster. Shadow Culture Secretary Lucy Powell says the organisation consistently finds itself at the centre of culture wars and that continuing the status quo is not an option. Scottish Labour is warning the incoming SNP leader to clear out the rot within their party. Deputy Leader Jackie Baillie is calling on the future First Minister to be more open and transparent. It's after figures revealed the SNP had lost 30,000 members in just over a year, which it had previously denied. Leadership candidates Humza Yousaf, Kate Forbes and Ash Regan will find out tomorrow who will become Scotland's next leader. Russia's President Vladimir Putin says he's struck a deal to store tactical nuclear weapons in neighbouring Belarus, which borders Ukraine. Speaking on state TV last night, he insisted it wasn't unusual, comparing it with the United States stationing its nuclear weapons on the territory of European allies. But a top security advisor to Ukraine's president says the plans would destabilise Belarus, claiming Russia has effectively taken the country hostage. US President Joe Biden has declared a state of emergency in Mississippi after a tornado killed at least 26 people. The twister swept through the state and into Alabama, cutting a path of destruction 170 miles long. Dozens have been injured and around 11,000 residents are still without power. Drone footage shows an entire town in Mississippi flattened. Joe Biden has described the images as heartbreaking and has offered federal support for the recovery. People in Mississippi say there was no safe place to hide.
This is the worst I have ever. This is devastating. I have so many family members, friends, memories that has been destroyed.
It's like a freight train that comes through. They thought it lasted 30 minutes. It was 20 seconds. One of the homeowners, said they finally woke up and they looked up and they thought they were dead.
In the face of potential arrest, Donald Trump held a defiant rally in Texas yesterday to kick off his 2024 Republican nomination campaign. It was the former president's first public appearance since speculating last week that he could soon be arrested over hush money payments to the adult film star Stormy Daniels. He lashed out against the investigation, claiming he's the most innocent man in the history of the US.
Prosecutorial misconduct is their new tool, and they are willing to use it at levels never seen before. The stakes of this election could not be more clear. Either we surrender to the demonic forces abolishing and demolishing and happily doing so, or we defeat them in a landslide on November 5th, 2024.
Matt Hancock and Kwasi Kwarteng have been caught up in a sting operation courting thousands of pounds to consult for a non-existent company. The two former cabinet ministers were approached by a fake South Korean firm set up by Campaign Group led by donkeys. Mr Hancock told them his daily rate would be £10,000, whilst Mr Kwarteng said he would expect to be paid a similar amount every month. MPs are allowed to seek employment outside of Parliament, and there's no accusation of any wrongdoing. You're up to date on GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Michael.
Thank you, Bethany. It's hard to believe that only in 1973 were women allowed onto the floor of the London Stock Exchange. Women had traded stocks for years in other forums, managing portfolios on behalf of wealthy investors or trading small shares in the coffee shops of London's Exchange Alley. But repeated votes to admit women to the floor of the stock exchange were defeated. In fact, permission for the entry of women brokers was begrudgingly granted thanks to the creation of a united stock exchange in 1972, an amalgamation that included regional exchanges where women already enjoyed equal access. I'm delighted to be joined by some of those women brokers who were admitted to the LSE shortly after the ban was lifted 50 years ago, Michelle Underwood and Sarah Daines, as well as by Dr. James Taylor from the University of Lancaster, who is writing a history of the stock exchange. Sarah, were you agitating to be admitted to the floor of the stock exchange? Was it something that mattered to you?
It was part of my career development. I left school and did a business studies course because at that time most women were expected to be secretaries. I didn't want to be a secretary, so I didn't learn how to type. So I was lucky enough, having really enjoyed economics, to get a job in the city working for a small broking firm in their office as an assistant to an assistant. I was then offered, after about a year, the opportunity to go and be a blue button, which was the sort of apprenticeship level of the stock exchange, and you actually had to wear a blue button, and you were allowed to go around and ask prices from the various jobbers. And so if you had, like BP, there would be 3 or 4 different jobbers making different prices in BP, and you'd report the sort of average price back. After that, I was promoted to a dealer after a year or so, and the dealer, I had to take an exam, had to go in front of the Stock Exchange Committee to be given the authority to trade, and then I was allowed to deal. And then after that, a few years later, I was asked to be a member, and I became head of dealing at the broking firm that I was at. So for me, I was young. I was 25 in '86 when Big Bang happened. But for me, it was just a career progression, and I really enjoyed absolutely every day of it. It was a very interesting job to do.
So when you were a blue button, that was the first time that you went onto the floor of the stock exchange, and I assume that nearly everyone there was a man, and I assume these brokers you were going up and talking about prices were on the whole men. How well were they behaving towards you?
There were about 1,400 men on the stock exchange, or people on the stock exchange, let's put it that way. Probably maybe 10 women at any one time. But that's all I'd known. I'd only ever worked with it in a male environment. So I think after a while they didn't take much notice of us, but they were always terribly polite, charming. You needed a sense of humour to get through the day, but it was a long day, and we just carried on and we just did our thing there.
Michelle, I believe you were also a blue button.
Yes, I was.
What was your year of entry to the stock exchange?
I joined in 1980.
Did you still feel like a pioneer being a woman at that stage?
Well, I'd like to sort of reiterate what Sarah said. I don't think we saw ourselves as pioneers at that stage. I took a job at the government stockbrokers at the time. That was in 1978, in the research department. And it was whilst I was there that I was talking to a friend. He said, you know, have you thought about the stock exchange? And I said, oh, my God, they don't have women down there. And they said, oh, yes, they are. So I was fortunate enough to get the opportunity to be a blue button with Charles Stanley. And as Sarah said, you know, it is an apprentice level. You're learning, it's overwhelming. It's a very steep learning curve. You know, you have to remember so much.
Are we talking about a scene where men, as they nearly all were, are standing around in groups yelling at each other and doing the hand gestures? Is this...
No, very gentlemanly.
What did it look like?
Hexagon shape. Each corner had different stocks, different sectors, and you had your specialists there, which were called jobbers.
Already talking about computer screens in these days?
No, we're not. No, this is... When Sarah and I joined, Sarah was there before me, there was no computers. You basically had the layout of the stock exchange floor, which were hexagons, all different sectors. Around that were telephones where we could communicate with the office. And then behind that were little rooms called boxes where everybody, all dealers congregated, picked up, spoke to the office. So that was the layout when we were there. Computers came in after Big Bang. So the market that we worked in was very gentlemanly. You had your experts who made their prices in whatever stock you were asking for, and we relayed that to the office.
And then Is that what you became? You became one of these experts over time, did you?
No, Sarah and I were on the broking side, and the people that were the specialists were actually called jobbers in those days. And one of our friends, Janet McCall, actually became one of the first jobbers with Wed Durlacher. So you had your two sides of the coin. You had the person making the price, so in racing terms, your bookmaker, and you had your punter. So Sarah and I were getting the prices for the person who wished to invest into those shares.
And then how did you progress? What did you go on to be in finance?
Well, it started off, you took your stock exchange practice exam, you then went up in front of the board, as Sarah mentioned, to become an authorised clerk, which is where you then wore a yellow badge. I didn't progress as far as Sarah in those terms because of Big Bang. So when Big Bang happened, I looked at the situation and thought, I think I need to expand my knowledge. So I joined Montague Investment Management and started to learn all about the European shares. And from there, I used to do the UK Arista trading. From there, I left. I was there about 8 years. I then went to Morgan Stanley. At Morgan Stanley, quite interestingly, an all-women's desk, which was quite novel for me, having always worked with men. And I was there 12 years, and I ended up running the desk for London. But the most amazing part about that segment of my career was the way technology actually made such an impact. I mean, I joined Morgan Stanley in, I think it was 95, and we had paper tickets. When I left, we had implemented, with the help of technology, straight-through processing, so you could hand your books.
Extraordinary changes. To explain, I mean, I can't really explain, although I was part of government at the time, but Big Bang was an enormous deregulation, which broke down the barriers and the boundaries between stockbroking and what used to be called merchant banking. So we then had these financial giants, which enabled London to become super competitive, but also, I would suggest, opened us up to the potential of some of the catastrophes that we've suffered since. James, you've been offered here 3 moments in history: the arrival of women, Big Bang, that moment of deregulation, and the extraordinary changes in technology. Which of these has been most significant?
A great question, Michael. I think almost I'll answer that by outmanoeuvring you and actually thinking that we have to look at the longer history here, that quite rightly today the focus is on 1973, with wonderful pioneers such as Sarah and Michelle. But there are actually significant rumblings of change on the stock exchange generations before this. And a lot of my research has been looking at a much longer history of women's participation in finance. As early as the late Victorian period, we have examples of women, enterprising, entrepreneurial-minded women, setting up their own brokerages and operating outside of the context of the stock exchange. When the stock exchange was formed back in the early 19th century, the whole aim of it, of formalising the market, was to exclude undesirables, as they put it. And one of those undesirable groups were women, frankly. But in the late 19th century, women decided to just take things into their own hands, set up their own brokerages. And several examples of women who are unknown today, women like Amy Bell, Beatrice Gordon-Holmes, set up very successful businesses which were quietly transforming the city. They were advertising the fact that women could thrive in finance, women could succeed in finance. The first documented case of a woman trying to gain admission to the stock exchange was not in the 60s, 70s, as we might think. It's as early as 1936 that women were confident enough to approach the stock exchange to write a letter saying, I want admission. And
it doesn't sound as though Michelle and Sarah were particularly agitators, but was there agitation? Was there a campaign?
I think some women were happy to just kind of work in their own way, work quietly, didn't see themselves as campaigners. Others very much were. The woman I referred to earlier, Amy Bell, was closely associated with the suffrage campaigns of that era. Beatrice Gordon-Holmes, she actually wrote an autobiography in the 1940s of her life. She was very proudly a feminist and was involved in a lot of new organisations in the interwar period for professional women, trying to transform the professional context for women. And then in the post-war world, Muriel Bailey, who married and became Muriel Wood, was perhaps the most prominent campaigner for women's rights. And it was kind of what secured change, I think, in the 70s was partly a combination of the campaigns of women like Muriel Bailey, but also circumstances that were beyond the stock exchange's control. So one factor is the fact that women were gaining entry to the regional stock exchanges, as you mentioned at the top. And when you have the merger of the nation's stock exchanges in 1972, that's when the vote goes through. An unintended consequence is that women now have rights of entry, because women were members of stock exchanges in Aberdeen, in Sheffield, in Manchester, and so on, and you couldn't really justify a two-tier system at that point. So that was significant. The legal context was also changing as well. The stock exchange had always been confident that it was on firm legal ground, excluding women, that this is a private club, this is a men's club, and it's up to us who we include and exclude as members. That changed, that kind of legal defence was blown apart in the mid-60s when a woman racehorse trainer successfully sued the jockey club, basically. She wanted a training licence. She took the
Let me bring, if I may, let me bring Sarah back in. You did not talk about facing hostility. As you look back, though, are you not absolutely quite shocked now to think that women weren't allowed onto the stock exchange floor until 50 years ago?
Yes, I mean, that's interesting, but they were women that had fought a lot themselves. They were very professional women, and it was just something that was evolving, I think, wasn't it? 50 years ago, things were very, very different. Education has changed tremendously. Yeah. And when I did my business studies course, I think there was one other woman on the course there. There wasn't the opportunities. And coming through, when we were there in the late 70s, we had a female prime minister who was empowering women and making us all feel that, yes.
I remember her. Yeah, I remember her. Yeah. Michelle, bring us up to date. I have read that actually the number of women in finance in London has fallen sharply in recent years, apparently down by about 30%. What's going on? Have you any idea about that?
I have thoughts, but I don't know it definitely.
What's your thought?
I think Big Bang has changed things slightly because the working from home, etc. It depends. I think in investment banking, hours are long. Women make decisions. Not only are they sometimes a bread earner, they also have to look after a household as well. And sometimes maybe they just decide that it's too much. I think the other reason that there aren't more women, potential reasons, is men are very good at promoting themselves. And I don't think women are as well. So, you know, a woman will apply for a job, and I'm saying this because this is what I used to do. If I could do 100% or a bit more of that job, yeah, I can do that job. So then I'd apply. And I have, in my history, experienced men applying for jobs that I eventually got. And I'm thinking, why are you applying? You couldn't even do 50% of what was on that. Anyway,
I want to confirm that completely. Any man who thinks he can
I
do
just say one
nearly
thing?
50% of the job definitely applies.
Right, just one thing. Sorry to interrupt. I think what women are missing were role models and are still role models. And the most important thing is you need a sponsor, whoever you are, whether you're male or female, you need somebody who's going to put their head on the line and say, this person can do this job. This person is the best person. And I don't think there are enough people doing that for women.
Well, a lot of very interesting history and very interesting reflections as well. So it's thanks to Michelle Underwood, Sarah Daines and Dr. James Taylor. After the break, we'll explore the growing success of Project Sunrise, increasing non-stop flight routes between Australia and Europe. And we'll be rejoined by author and critic Philip Hensher to discuss his new book, To Battersea Park.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes & Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Dubes & Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today. Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. When Qantas aircraft began flying directly from the Western Australian city of Perth to London just 5 years ago this week, it inaugurated a new age in which every continent, excluding Antarctica, is connected to every other by non-stop flights. Project Sunrise, as it's called, is now expanding. Non-stop flights from Sydney to London and New York are expected to begin in 2025. To soar into this subject, I'm joined by the travel expert John Strickland. Very good to see you on GB News. Now, I would love to do this. I would love to fly non-stop between London and Australia. But am I in quite a small minority? Is this quite a niche market? Who are the people who wish to do this?
I think it is quite a small market. I mean, I was surprised just how successful these flights to Perth proved when they began 5 years ago, because the main destinations in Australia are Sydney and Melbourne, and you can, in fact, connect on to those from Perth. But these planes have been packed. And the interesting thing is the way that Qantas have laid these aircraft out is it's far more weighted to the comfy seats, for the business class and premium economy seats. And when they start the Sydney flights, they'll put first class on as well. But if you're even travelling in economy, where the prices are a bit cheaper, there's more space. More space has been allocated for all passengers. And there's a lot of focus on the quality of service on board to make it a good experience. But having said that, the prices probably for all cabins are still a bit higher. And the majority of people still are flying one stop via somewhere like Dubai or Singapore on the more conventional service.
There are some technical aspects to this, are there not? They can do things to improve the quality of the airflow in the cabin for people who are going to be on board for 17 to 20 hours.
That's right. The type of aircraft they're using, the 787, is made substantially out of carbon composite, not metal components, aluminium being more typical for previous aircraft. And that means that it can handle higher levels of humidity so we don't feel so dehydrated, and lower levels of cabin pressure. So there is a noticeable difference getting off a flight, notwithstanding what kind of seat you've travelled in, and actually feeling better. The aircraft also has cabin lighting, which is used by the crews to simulate sunrise, sunset, so there's more feeling of being in a continuous environment of a normal day. The meals, both by content and when they're served, are also designed to make it feel more comfortable, so you don't get that feeling of having just been force-fed for many hours as you might have on a traditional flight.
I think the attraction to me is getting to my destination or very close to my destination quickly. Although the airports in the Middle East are very, very pleasant, I don't actually find the experience of being marched off the plane and then being marched back onto the plane particularly pleasant. I think I'd rather just be settled and relaxed. So those are perhaps some reasons why you might be willing to pay a premium. Presumably these are good business for the airlines, otherwise they wouldn't be talking about extending to even longer distances now.
It's proved really good business for Qantas. I mean, as I mentioned, the planes have been packed, and with a large share of the seats being in the premium fare cabins, they've just not been able to offer enough seats, really, and the flight is going to continue undoubtedly with a lot of success. I think once they start Sydney and Melbourne, which are the bigger destinations, the same will apply. And I think you're right. You know, the hubs that we have, whether it's Dubai or Singapore, they can be nice airports to hang around a few hours in if you have to. But if you're really travelling in comfort, you can lie flat as you would do indeed in a business class seat. You have really high standard catering, plenty of space, and of course availability of unlimited supplies of water to keep hydrated, or alcohol if you so wish to partake. It is a comfortable journey, and 17 hours may actually pass more quickly than people might imagine.
We better say something about the environment. That some people will be rather horrified by this news item. What can we say about the environment? First of all, that these aircraft are 2-engine, not 4-engine, so that presumably means they make less impact. Do they make less impact by not stopping?
That should help as well, because just as you're driving a car in an urban situation, stop-start at traffic lights, if you have to descend to land and take off, that's when the fuel burn is accelerated. So cruising is the time when the engines are in flight idle mode. They can actually, burn considerably less fuel. And as you said, being a 2-engine plane compared to the jumbos of old, the 747, which I first went to Australia on, or even the A380 now, these are 4-engine planes with 1980s technology engines. These engines are burning about 25% less fuel and producing substantially less emissions as well per passenger. And it's worth mentioning that we're now moving towards something called sustainable aviation fuel, which also reduces emissions, and Qantas makes sure they load 10% of that as part of a fuel mix at Heathrow for these flights.
Right. Well, I might see you in, what should we say, in business class on the non-stop to Sydney, and we'll feel good about not doing too much damage to the environment. Thank you very much to John Strickland. In a few minutes, we'll be discussing the decline of the male fiction reader with authors Gavin James Bauer and Philip Hensher. But first, an update on today's headlines with Bethany Elsey.
Michael, thank you. Good afternoon. It's just gone 12:30. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Offenders who commit antisocial behaviour will be forced to clean up their communities as part of the Prime Minister's new immediate justice scheme. Under the plans set to be announced tomorrow, local authorities will be given fresh powers to quickly and visibly punish criminals. Those who spray graffiti or commit other vandalism will have to make good the damage within 48 hours of being given the order. Other penalties include picking up litter, washing police cars and doing unpaid work in shops. Well, as part of the crackdown, the government has also announced a ban on the sale of laughing gas. The Levelling Up Secretary, Michael Gove, has told broadcasters this morning that nitrous oxide canisters are helping fuel antisocial behaviour, turning public spaces into so-called drug-taking arenas. Scottish Labour is warning the incoming SNP leader to clear out the rot within their party. Deputy Leader Jackie Baillie is calling on the future First Minister to be more open and transparent. It's after figures revealed the SNP had lost 30,000 members in just over a year, which it had previously denied. Leadership candidates Humza Yousaf, Kate Forbes and Ash Regan will find out tomorrow who will become Scotland's next leader. Russia's President Vladimir Putin says he's struck a deal to store tactical nuclear weapons in neighbouring Belarus, which borders Ukraine. Speaking on state TV last night, he insisted it wasn't unusual, comparing it with the United States storing its nuclear weapons on the territory of European allies. But a top security advisor to Ukraine's president says Russia has effectively taken Belarus hostage. And US President Joe Biden has declared a state of emergency in Mississippi after a tornado there killed at least 26 people. The twister swept through the state and into Alabama, cutting a path of destruction 170 miles long. Dozens have been injured and around 11,000 residents are still without power. Drone footage shows an entire town in Mississippi flattened. President Joe Biden has described those images as heartbreaking and has offered federal support for the recovery. You're watching GB News on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. Now it's back to Michael.
Thank you very much, Bethany. Repeated surveys show men now account for just 20% of the fictional books market. Why? Various theories have been advanced. For example, that whilst women are fine with reading male authors, men are much more less likely to read female authors. But perhaps the attitude of many men towards fiction was best summed up by the lead singer of Oasis, Noel Gallagher, when he said in more colourful language than I can repeat now that reading fiction is a waste of time. It isn't true. Gallagher would restrict himself, he said, to things that actually happened. My next two guests won't be discouraged. Each is an author, journalist and critic, and both teach creative writing at Bath Spa University. Gavin James Bauer and Philip Hensher. Welcome back to you, Philip. Lovely to see you, Gavin. But what is your explanation for this?
Well, I suppose it comes down to ultimately what novels are for. I think if you think about from the point of view of not a very representative panel here when it comes to not reading fiction, given that we both write it, read it, teach it, we might think, well, what's the novel for? What's it good at? And really the novel, from my point of view, is about, as it were, is about people. It's about relationships. It's about what people are thinking, what people are feeling. And those things, I don't think, if I can be terribly reductive in what is essentially a binary debate here anyway, men are very good at. They're not really as good at that as women are, and women seem to be drawn to fiction and reading as well as writing fiction in huge numbers because they're drawn to that very thing, the thing that men aren't.
The thing that you just said about fiction, to a large extent, could be said about most art. What is the purpose of it? Reflecting feelings, taking us out of ourselves, showing us our human experience. Do we know then whether men are less interested in paintings? Are they less interested in sculpture? Are they less interested in theatre?
It's interesting. I've never heard a man proudly proclaim at a dinner party that he's giving up on painting or giving up on going to galleries to look at photographs, but I have heard men say, I don't read fiction anymore. You just named Noel Gallagher as one example. I haven't been at a dinner party with Noel Gallagher, but other men have said that, and rather proudly, I don't read fiction. It's not important enough, it's not serious enough, it's not true, etc., etc. I've never heard a man say that about other art.
But let's put it the other way around, Philip. We're talking about a market here.
Yes.
And there's a danger that we blame the customer.
Yeah, I think there's...
What are the producers doing in this market?
Exactly. I think there's a demand-side solution to the problem, which is that the market ought to improve itself and become better people. And there's a supply-side argument, which is that novels should get a bit better, actually. And I do think that there are novelists coming up that men do read. The example that I would choose is Mick Herron. I think that he's writing these fantastic spy novels, very, very well informed about the world, about the way that things work, not novels that sometimes the literary world has started to praise, which I read a chapter of it, and it's somebody walking down the street, and they're thinking deep thoughts about what happened in their life 10 years ago, and then they get to the end of the street, and that's the end of the chapter. That's no good. So I do think that there are two ways of looking at it. Certainly, men should be a bit more adventurous and maybe not just read new fiction, but go back to the sort of classics and really established books that really still have an enormous amount to offer us. But also, I think that novelists ought to try harder to write things that are going to interest all sorts of people.
If they went back to the classics, of course, they would find some absolutely marvellous women writers. Let's just think about women writers for a moment. I mean, I suppose the woman writer that most transfixed me in recent times, relatively recent times, was Donna Tartt. I've also very much enjoyed books like Normal People. I've very much enjoyed Patricia Cornwell. What can women do to get across to men, do you think?
I don't know if this is for me to say what women should and shouldn't do, but I do think that actually women don't really need to do anything here. I think we're sort of suggesting here that maybe it's the market, maybe it's the supply. In either case, can men be more adventurous in terms of their tastes and their interests? Can publishers target them? I'm not sure women need to do anything. They make up most of the writers now. For the first time, 50 years, we've looked at figures. Now they make up most of the writers. They make up most of the publishing industry. The novel is thriving, more books published today than ever before. So actually, maybe they don't need men and they don't really need to do anything, if that's...
Gavin, may I ask you about part of the process? When you first think about writing a novel, do you think about the customer? Do you think about the reader? Do you think about the market?
No, not at all. I mean, I don't want to give you the pithy, I'm an artist and I don't like talking about my art kind of answer. But honestly, I'm not really thinking about who's reading it. I'm thinking about this excites me, this interests me, this character's in my head. I have to get it out. Those sorts of questions, not who's going to read it. Do you really?
Yeah, I do. And I think about individual people that I know very well, and I often think this will make so-and-so laugh.
Do you think about me?
No.
Right.
No.
Good to know.
Philip, it's a good moment to segue into your new book, To Battersea Park.
To Battersea Park.
Were you thinking about your reader, your customer, as you said?
Yes, I was actually, and I think it's a book about what happened to us during this very strange period that we've just been through, and the way that when you're locked inside, your mind went out. You had to try and understand the world very close to you, and it starts with an investigation of the sort of 100 or 200 yards from my house in South London. And the thing that I found very interesting during lockdown was suddenly I became aware that there were 2 ginkgo trees, that there was an underground river about 100 yards from where we live. All these things that had been completely invisible to you. And I think that what the novel really does, what the novel as a form really does, is to go out and investigate the world. And it shouldn't just talk about oneself or your own emotions, but what's there, really.
But sticking with your emotions, or at least your views for a moment, I was very interested in your attitude to the authorities at that time. You always refer to the state told us to do this, the state has commanded that. You're rather on my territory here. I mean, that's the sort of language that I would use about it.
Yes.
But that sort of language carries a resentment. It sounds as though you were quite put out by having to take orders.
Well, I don't know about resentment. I mean, I think actually I kept talking about the state because it just seemed funny to me. You know, it just seemed... It just seemed ridiculous, really, some of the things that we were being told, and why it is my general tendency as a novelist not to accept the word of authorities. I mean, as a novelist, I'm always standing around gawping in the street, and I'm always being told by security guards to move on because there's nothing to see here, and that was really a moment when the individual mind and the anarchistic mind that I think all novelists have kind of came across this list of instructions that you're supposed to carry out, and you know who's going to win in the end. It's going to be us, really.
Turning to the anarchistic mind, there's a surprise moment, which I will not spoil, in the book, a moment of great violence. I was quite surprised by it. I didn't see it coming, and I'm not quite sure that I can count for it now. Why did it arise within you, that thing, do you think?
Well, I think it was a balancing act, really, about questioning the authority and questioning the rules that were imposed on us, but acknowledging as well that those rules allow us to live our lives. And if they were all taken away, then what would stop us from doing whatever we felt like doing, you know, and carrying out acts of violence with no sense that it would lead to consequences. So,
and one of your characters reaches that conclusion that the act can be committed without consequence.
Yes. I mean, in the society that he is living in, which is not exactly the society that we're living in now, it goes into new territory for me, this book, in that it's got a passage about the near future. I love science fiction. I never thought I'd be writing science fiction.
I'm so grateful to you both. I'm sorry we didn't have longer. Fascinating discussion. Gavin, James Bauer and Philip Hensher. After the break, watch me donning my beekeeper suit and sampling some of the tastiest honey in Britain. Stay with us for that.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island's story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back. Often on this programme, I'm keen to highlight some of the wonderful foods produced in Britain. And a spoiler alert, this week's quest required me to hide my colourful clothing beneath a protective shroud. The place of origin of a jar of honey is as important as a vineyard to a bottle of wine. And the care that is taken of the honeybees is comparable to looking after the vine. I've come to Essex for some of Britain's finest and wildest honey. How was it that you became interested in honey?
Through my husband Dale training as a beekeeper, leaving the city and deciding that he wanted to change his life fairly substantially, and he was lucky enough to be trained by the Queen's beekeeper, a man called John Chappell. We all assumed at that point, all those years ago, which was 2006, 2007, that there was a problem with honeybees potentially going extinct. That is not the case actually at all anymore. There's enough honeybees. It's the other bees we have to worry about, the wild bees. I got suckered into it, Michael. I didn't mean to. I'm a writer. That's what I am.
But you're also a honey sommelier.
I am.
And what does that mean?
Well, that means that I trained in Italy with a body of people who are very concerned with qualifying the authenticity of honey. And the human palate is always going to be the best way to analyse honey. We very much talk about our honey as people would talk about wine. We talk about the terroir because it comes from the soil in the same way as wine. It's affected by the climate. The bees live their lives as they do, but it's very different from year to year because they're responding very sensitively to the conditions around them.
You used to have bees in London, is that right?
We did. We started off as London beekeepers, and we were one of the first people doing it. Again, it seemed like a brilliant thing to do, and it was. As time has gone on, a lot of beekeepers have piled into London, so we now have a situation where London has, by a factor of 3 times, the highest honeybee population of anywhere in Europe. Now, that's clearly not sustainable, and we've had terrible outbreaks. Parallel with COVID, we had outbreaks of terrible bee disease, which we had to deal with. So we've been very steadily moving hives out of central London, off the rooftops, and into London Docklands.
And what is the difference between honey that might come from a hive like these that we see behind us and the honey I might buy in the supermarket?
They are completely different. One of the best equations is to think about a single estate coffee, some wonderful beans grown by somebody in a place, a named place by a named producer, and compare that to a cup of instant coffee granules. The honey in a supermarket is largely a constructed, processed and anonymised product. You have no idea its origins.
So a fundamental difference between this sort of honey and supermarket honey. May I go over there and take a look?
Yes, let's do that.
Here we are at the end of March. I thought the bees would be quite docile at this time of year, but they're buzzing about.
Yeah, well, the weather is good. We've got sunshine, we've got 14 degrees of temperature, and so there's pollen to be had.
So, Dale, what are the duties of the beekeeper? What does the beekeeper have to do to help the bees?
Well, I think our view about beekeeping is you want to have maximum knowledge and minimum intervention. So really the bees have been on Earth for 88 million years and they know how to be bees. So I don't want to try and tell them how to do that. I just want to help them on their way through becoming better bees.
Now, would it be terribly intrusive if we looked inside a hive?
Not at all. Always just remember that what we're doing when we open up a hive is we're changing their environment from dark to light, and we're dropping the temperature by probably about 15 degrees. Everyone are very concerned about bees, but here I'm putting my hand right in the middle of our bees, and there isn't any consternation amongst them at all. They're really not that disturbed at all to see us. And you see they've still got plenty of honey left here from winter. Still lots to get them going into the spring.
Did it take you long to learn all these techniques, Dale?
I'm still learning. I mean, it's only been 17 years after all. So here we have a nice frame of bees. You've got pollen there, you've got bee eggs. Like chess pieces, they can only do certain things and make certain moves, but the combination of those moves, like chess, is pretty infinite, which makes beekeeping quite interesting as you try to piece together which way the bees are heading and what they're up to. But that's just the queen bee that was responsible for all of these eggs. All of these bees are her daughters.
All of them?
All of them.
That's quite a rate of reproduction, isn't it?
Yes. You need to get this bee colony up to about 70,000. So if you put your push my fingers out the way. There you go. So there you are, Michael. Big smile. Now that you're a beekeeper, you've made a great progress here.
It is quite a feeling, this, because we're all trained, we're all conditioned, aren't we, to be frightened of bees and wasps. And here I am holding, what, a couple of thousand, I imagine?
Yep,
Yeah.
that's right.
Extraordinary.
So we'll leave all of that and we're going to taste some wonderful British honeys. I'm going to start you off with what is the closest that we have in Britain to a monofloral, a single plant honey, and that's a heather honey. So I'm going to just teach you a tasting technique as well, because putting honey straight on your tongue, what happens is that the taste buds will immediately give you that sense of sweetness, and what we don't want to talk about in honey is sweetness. We want to talk about savoury notes, we want to talk about the other things that develop. You take a good honey tasting, you have to really indulge yourself. You take a great big wadge of it. You're going to put it in your mouth holding your nose, and you're going to then take the spoon out and count at 4 and just let your tongue take it to the back and then breathe through. Then you'll get this great blast of aromas. So, classically, heather honey has this wonderful crunchy texture, silky in between, and it's bittersweet. If you can imagine being on the moors, when there's that great carpet of purple, that's when the bees are there, and the smell of the moors.
It's a glorious honey, isn't it?
It is a glorious, glorious
Both
honey.
texture and flavour. Oh, that's wonderful.
Wonderful. I'm very, very keen on our London Docklands honey because they come from rewilded land. It's just growing wild, and they're helping themselves to it. They're not requiring somebody to plant a crop to feed them. This is just what nature provides.
Where can people get beautiful honeys like these?
A lot of my honey shopping online. Yes, and look for small producers.
Yeah.
And look for producers who are talking about where their bees are and how it's differentiated it is. So this is very shrubby, this honey. This won best honey in the UK. So a couple of years ago. It's one of our...
What do you mean by shrubby? What kind of...
sort of green herby notes. And they're quite different from that heather, as you see.
Completely different. Who are the specialist buyers of honey? What sort of people want to buy very particular honeys?
Chefs. Chefs. That's we entirely sell to chefs and bartenders because they're very good at picking out the individual notes. They'll then reflect those in something, a dish that they're making. I'm going to do a horrible thing to you, Michael. You asked me earlier the difference between a supermarket honey and real honey, and I think now you've had two quite big thwacking honeys, you'll be able to...
So now you're opening up a glorious plastic bottle.
I'm opening up a glorious plastic bottle. It's dead.
Yeah.
It's absolutely dead.
Completely pale.
Yeah, there's no...
Doesn't have anything, does it?
No depth, no longer on the tongue. There's nothing. It's just absolutely awful.
So wonderful British honey, being shaken or stirred, if you're lucky, at a cocktail bar near you. Thank you very much to Sarah Wyndham-Lewis and Dale Gibson at Bermondsey Street Bees. Sarah's new book, The Wild Bee Handbook, is out on the 13th of April. Emily Carver is up next. What will you have for us?
We're going to go quite heavy on Law and Order this afternoon. What better to do on a Sunday lunchtime? We're going to be talking about Keir Starmer's plans to, well, very ambitious plans, actually, to halve violent crime and things. But then Rishi Sunak is across the papers giving his plans to cut down on antisocial behaviour. So we'll be getting stuck into that.
That sounds like a very interesting programme. I must say that I'm sceptical about both of those, both the Starmer plans and the things that have been revealed recently by the Conservatives. Anyway, it's coming to the end of my time with you. Remember that it is Boat Race Day. I'd like to thank all my guests this week. Next week, Julian Lloyd-Webber pipes up in Cambridge to explore the secrets of organ playing. But for now, that's all from me. Goodbye and up Cambridge.
Good afternoon, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office. So looking ahead to the start of next week, and after a cold night, we'll see some drier and more settled weather becoming established across the UK. And this is all due to a change in our bigger weather picture. So this morning's low pressure across the southeast will move away, and this will allow some northerly winds to set up, bringing some colder air across the whole of the UK to start Monday. But back to this evening, and we'll see some showers persisting across northern and eastern coasts, and these could just be wintry for a time. But skies will clear, allowing for a widespread harsh frost across Northern Ireland, Scotland and Northern England tonight, where we could see temperatures dropping as low as -6 to -8. Now further south there'll be some patchy cloud around, but there could still be a patchy frost to start Monday and maybe just the odd shower too. But away from this, skies will clear to start the new week, allowing for plenty of sunshine and fine and dry weather. It'll be feeling pleasant in that sunshine, but temperatures will not be much higher tomorrow than what we'll have seen today, with highs of around 11 degrees. As we go into Monday afternoon and evening, we do cling on to those bright, clearer skies across the north and the east as we go through to Monday night. But further west, we see cloud and rain moving in from the Atlantic as that next low pressure system moves in. So a cloudier, milder night here. But across the northern and eastern areas, we could just see a patchy frost still to start Tuesday morning. But it will be a short-lived frost as that cloud